Hello and welcome. I'm Michele Gray, formerly Elking. I'm a neurosomatic coach and consultant, and I've been working at the intersection of ADHD, trauma, and nervous system restoration for 26 years. This is not managed, fully lived. It's for the woman who has tried all the things and still hitting a wall, either in the life she's built or the one she's expanding into. This show gets into the 80%. The biological terrain, the somatic truth, the layer under the layer that every strategy tried cannot touch. Glad you're here.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And today we're going to talk more deeply about the how. How did I get to that transformation? Because last time I told you what happened. Today I'm going to tell you about what I actually did about it and what it eventually did turn into in terms of my work and personal. So the strategies, as I mentioned before, the top-down strategies, they stopped working and I had to build something from the ground up because we were in that state within the pandemic of the whole world shutting down, everything that I love, everything that I had access to, like many of you as well, we didn't. And so what were we feeling? The isolation and not being able to use the tools that had worked well. I was, of course, grieving deeply on top of it all and really had to figure this out. So when we look at what the rebuild actually looked like, okay, we're gonna get very specific and physical. I'm not saying I did somatic work. And when I say somatic work, I see this a lot online where nervous system regulation appears to be like, oh, do some breathing, just regulate your nervous system. But no one, think about it. How many coaches do you hear or people who are talking about nervous system work or people in the ADHD world or nervous system world are talking about regulating your nervous system? They tell you to do it, but they don't necessarily show you the behind the scenes or show you how in a very nuanced and in-depth way. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. In fact, I just did a stitch and it's no disrespect to this particular person. It's just so common. Do some deep breathing, ground. The problem with that is it's not mapped against specific states and your physiology or neurobiology. It either is not going to land well or worse, it could put you into a deeper state of dysregulation. So we're going to talk more in depth about the rebuild. Where it started was I lived in Boulder, as I had mentioned previously, and I would go out and I would hike in these areas away from trailheads where there was a lot of crowds and people. I love to get beyond that. I would do miles and miles of backcountry hiking by myself. And people often say, weren't you afraid? I was not afraid. It was my place. Of course, I went in prepared. I know how to prepare for being in the backcountry. And I did the best that I could to be prepared. And I used, or not used, that is the wrong word. I had access to nature in a way that allowed me to connect with what I needed to cry, to hike, to run, to scream, to pray. I did it all. I think it's really important because what I'm sharing with you is I didn't overthink what I was doing. And if I'd found myself in a place of ruminating, of overthinking, I knew enough to be able to drop into my body and feel into what did I need. And I allowed my body to give me the signals and signs of how it needed to come out. How did that emotional charge need to be expressed? What did I need physically? And the reason this work is so important and the reason that it's important to have someone guide you through it is that our nervous system will do what it needs to protect itself, to keep us safe, to keep us comfortable. And sometimes what we actually need to move the needle or to move into an area of more capacity. And when I say capacity, it's to hold. And there is some information out there is like, oh, it's not about holding. No, we want to be able to contain and hold. And sometimes we want to be able to move through and discharge. And so I knew that if I was feeling very low energy and I hadn't had that movement, what I actually needed to do was to activate a little bit. I didn't need to continue to rest. I had plenty of rest. I didn't need to continue to sit and be in a place where that would further put me into what I felt was that immobilization energy, or we could say it looks like depression. I knew enough that I knew that I needed to get out and move and bring in activation and movement into my body. This was at a point, I'll share this story. I talked about this a little bit maybe last time. I was so incredibly disconnected from myself. I remember at one point, I tracked it. I was 90 minutes into a pretty intense hike before I started to actually feel myself coming back into my body. What does that look like? Where the brain fog started to dissipate, where I actually felt, I had a felt sense of being in my body. Not like I was outside of it or floating above it, but I was grounded in my body. And what I wasn't doing was I wasn't doing a ton of planning or producing and optimizing at that time. And as we know, there was not a ton to do socially because of the state of the world at that time. So the one, I guess you could say, an aspect or benefit of being in that place during that time was that I did have the ability to move through everything because it was as if the world had stopped, or as if things had been slowing down or shutting down. So that was the one benefit. Again, regulation is not Zen. Regulation is building the capacity, the flexibility, the adaptability to hold the life that you have, the life that you built, and the one that you expand into. Because so many women that I meet, that I talk to, that I coach are high performing. They're capable. They are defined by their diagnosis. Yet they've created this beautiful line from the outside and internally are just drowning in it. They're overwhelmed, or they've gotten through that initial phase of accessing the tools and building the life that they want. And now they're ready to level up. How do I expand? How do I continue to grow my container? How do I continue to be able to hold and expand and flow with everything that I want? And it's possible. The realization of bottom up work before top down work is paramount. It's huge. And this speaks to the science of it. We know that the information, the communication loop is bidirectional, meaning, yes, we are inputting through our senses information bottom up. And we're also digesting, so to speak, information top down. The caveat or the important part of this is 80%, right? So I talk about the 80%. It's 80% body to brain. So as I mentioned before, if you've tried traditional talk therapy where you're really processing and just talking about what's not working, why is it not working, without the pieces that support getting into the unconscious, subconscious, the repatterning, the brain networks of doing the rewiring and neural connection repatterning, then you will just continue to solidify those old patterns on repeat. And this is why I feel it's important, and the science shows this, and not just my belief, my feeling, what I've seen for thousands of clients over 26 years is that for sustainable change to happen, we really do have to get into the bottom up work. And there could be other interventions, protocols you can pair alongside it. But in terms of the brain development and how we want to make those changes, the bottom up work is crucial. I think of three core pillars to this methodology, and it's really about restoration, right? Restoration of the nervous system as the foundation of our physical vessel, honoring your vessel, the physical well-being, being able to manage and get support. This is important for the mental load that most women carry, the emotional processing, of course, emotional flourishing. And we think about this in terms of also building sovereignty. Like, how are we able to function independent of anything that we've been told about our brains and bodies? Beyond any labels, beyond any diagnoses, beyond any constraints, right? We want to be able to sovereignly fold the vision for our lives, for our well being, for our families, for our communities. And that brings us into the final piece as community, because we are wired for connection. It's in our biology, it's in our DNA. And we have to be able to be in those environments where we give and receive. It's the reciprocity that has been broken. It has been removed from our society, where the independent lone wolf archetype has been in. Not only is it acknowledged and promoted in this capitalistic industrial society we live in, it is seen as the pinnacle. To be high achieving, to be high performing, high output, and many times doing it alone. And what I often see as a big challenge for women is, even if they want to have those relationships, they want to have the intimacy, they want to be able to have that exchange, oftentimes they push it away. They push it away subconsciously, they push it away intentionally. And this is such a core pillar of the work. And it's why we do this together in a safe space, because if there's programming there that it's not safe to be in connection, or there's been past trauma or abuse, it requires titration. It requires pendulation to be able to move back and forth between those states. We heal in community, not in isolation. And that is the fundamental piece. What I was doing to survive, essentially, during that time period, and what I figured out and how I applied it how I embodied it, how I integrated it, became the structure that I now teach. So we have the nervous system regulation first, moving from, often what I see is chronic activation, folks who have the diagnosis of ADHD or anxiety, or often trapped in the go-go crash cycle, as I call it. We have to build in that safety first. And I'm not going to get into the specifics today on what those strategies are. And again, they're very nuanced, but that's the first step, the foundation. Like I said, the whole person well-being, the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, however you define that. It does not necessarily mean religious, although it can be. Many of the women that I work with find deep spiritual connection and have really close relationship to source, universe, God, spirit, through nature, through creativity, through music, through intuition, right? And after all of that foundation is set, after we've been able to really embody what that looks like, how it feels, it becomes second nature, the optimization strategies come last. Again, because the foundation has now been built where the optimization can hold on to. But this is what I often see, or what I've seen in this work for decades, is that everything has been focused in the ADHD world, or now you can include neurodivergence as well. It's top down, it's mindset, it's hacks, it's time management, it's all of the things that definitely have more of I would say, a left brain masculine kind of lens. And especially within organizational work and in workplaces and corporate, that is usually what people want to see. It's how do I get to be more productive? How do I optimize? How do I improve from this lens? The interesting thing that I'll share is that if you're really and truly doing regulation work that increases your capacity or allows you to be fully expressed, I'll say this, because there are times where maybe you don't want to increase your capacity. Maybe you're good and you're actually learning to put some limits and boundaries around what you've been tolerating. It's not about increasing capacity, but it's about putting a hard yet flexible container around where you are. And that can swing back and forth. But the core line is most of that is focused on information. It's easy to get on Instagram. It's easy to ask chat. We all have access to this information. We can pull a protocol. There's a 5-step process, a 3-step, 3-day reset protocol, what have you. That is not embodiment. That is not integration. Information that is not applied over time and doesn't exist as a lived experience or felt sense is not going to stick. And that's also what I often see are people who are quite dysregulated, stressed, overwhelmed, or stuck, and pulling for different strategies to solve a problem that is a more root cause issue. Maybe it has more to do with identity. Maybe, like I said, it has to do with the nervous system itself. Usually it's a combination of the two, right? And so I think it's important to really say I am not opposed to those top-down strategies. I am not opposed to talk therapy or the planners or protocols. The gap, though, isn't information. It's the same bottom-up work. We don't need to continue to add 1,000 things on our to-do list because we live very busy lives. And oftentimes it's about subtraction. And I talk about this pretty frequently. The way that we do this work isn't about adding a ton of to-dos onto your plate. It's about figuring out where am I leaking energy? Where am I overgiving, overfunctioning? Where am I masking? Where am I not living in my joy? And where am I not fully expressed? Am I scared to be seen and felt? Where am I not honoring my needs, including my foundational needs and nourishing myself? Then how do we build incremental gains in those areas? So you don't need to lose everything to get here. And that's the whole reason this podcast exists, right? You can get beyond the management. You can get beyond the symptom management to live a life that's fully expressed, not managed, fully lived. If you're looking for a starting point and you're very new to this type of work, comment reset below and I'll share my 3 practices guide to help you build capacity for the life you want to live. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found this podcast and it's great to have you. Drop a comment, subscribe. You can follow me as well on Instagram, Substack at Soldier and Coach. Thank you. Send this to a friend who needs to hear it. Again, don't forget to drop the reset if you want the free guide. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for being here. If this connected with you, subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And come find me on Instagram or Substack at Soldier and Coach. Not managed, fully lived. And I'll see you next time. Take care.